everyone, and welcome to another episode of Public Health Musings. I'm so excited to have you on, and I would like to encourage you to subscribe, whether you're listening to the audio version or if you're listening and watching on YouTube. I'm glad that you could join us today. I have a great treat for this month, all the way from Kenya. I'm so excited to be talking to Dr. Evans Kituyi, who is an independent consultant with extensive experience, over 20 years in sustainable energy, climate and development, as well as the green economy. He has also taught and engaged in research, as well as mentorship, and has also done policy engagement at the local and international levels. Before he went into private practice, he was the director of the East Africa Institute, which is a think tank at Aga Khan University, and he was there for about 10 years as a senior program specialist, also in climate change programming with the Canada's International Development Research Center. He has a PhD in atmospheric chemistry from the University of Nairobi, an MBA in strategic management from African Nazarene University, and an MSc in environmental chemistry from University of Nairobi, and BSc in chemistry from Moi University. And he's also served on various boards at the local and international organizations. And he's an associate of the Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation of the University of Nairobi. We are so excited to have you, Dr. Kituyi. Everyone join me in welcoming Dr. Kituyi to the show. Yay!
Thank you, Caroline.
So I have heard so much about you and your work. And now with all the hype that's happening with climate change, I really wanted to talk to someone from an international level, and especially from the continent. And, you know, you are both an international development professional as well as a climate change professional. Tell us how you got here. You know, I see you have a lot of experience and, work in chemistry, atmospheric chemistry. How did you decide to get to, to do that and to major in that area and your interest in climate and development?
Thank you, Caroline, for that. It was a mouthful. Yeah, actually, it all goes back to when I was collecting my PhD data in Zimbabwe. But before I reached there, maybe I could say I left when I did my master's, it was in chemistry, environmental chemistry, but then I was offered something else that was very different. You know, I had done chemicals in food and agriculture, and here I was being offered a fellowship to go to Germany to go and study atmospheric chemistry. So I said, should I take it? Should I not? I said, I'm going for it. It's chemistry at the end of the day, so let me go. So while there, I set up with my professors. I was coming to Africa to collect data because I was working on the emission of gases from fuel wood, from cooking charcoal, and so on. So we wanted to know to what extent do these kind of practices across Africa contribute to local atmospheric chemistry systems and also to climate change. So that is ideally what we set out to do. And of course, I had to spend hours and hours sitting with women who are cooking. I mean, as you know, in this part of the world, I mean, our mothers and sisters and grannies are they're the main cooks. And so this was in Zimbabwe and Kenya. So sitting with about 300 of them in different homes and fires, it was exciting watching how they start the fires, how they cook the food, how we eat. I used to join them in some of the meals, and how the fire just dies off. So during the 4 or 5 hours I spend in each house, I used to have this dialogue with the ladies, and then they tell me, you scientists keep coming here to collect data. You are not the first. We have many who come and they interview us for some minutes and they go. But they never come back to tell us anything. Our lives never change at all. Nobody ever comes and says, you remember that study so-and-so did? We are now coming to bring this change because of that. Nothing ever happens. So is yours going to be different? Are you coming to help us, to get out of this smoke and stuff like that? So that thing always pained me, because 67 out of 300 homes that I sat in, I was asked that question. So I imagined that this was, what do you call it? These guys are fatigued by we guys, scientists, going to ask them questions endlessly and never going back to communicate what we found. So that is actually something that turned my trajectory. When I left Zimbabwe, came to Nairobi, did the same in Kenya, and then went back to Germany. When I was analyzing my data and traveling one city to another, presenting my results in different conferences, I kept asking myself, am I going back to do the hard science again? Or should I go back to Africa and solve these problems? So that thing lingered on my mind until I actually got an invite to go to National Atmospheric Research Center in Boulder, Colorado, for a 2-year postdoc on hard sciences again, gases and their transformation in the atmosphere. And I had another opportunity to come to the African Center for Technology Studies here in Nairobi to do policy research in climate change. So here I was making that tough decision. Should I go to the US and do this thing? Or should I just go back to Africa and just deal with African stuff? So to me, it was easy at that point now to jump ship. So that was a turning point. I said bye-bye to physical sciences. And I joined a team at African Center, which was working on climate change. And so this was an economist and a lawyer, who are working on climate change. But they needed some scientific input. So I joined the team and it was complete. We worked together with them. With people like Professor Patricia Mbote, maybe you know her. She was the lawyer who was on the team, and others. Anyway, so to me, that was the beginning of what has turned out to be somebody working at the interface of science and policy. So that's where I've been for the last several years, and where I was struggling to teach chemistry, back at the university after my PhD. And because I was working partly for African Center for Technology Studies, partly for the University of Nairobi, teaching chemistry, I used to struggle, to prepare my lessons. And, you just go to teach the theory and you jump out and go and join the NGOs in meetings and so on. So I ended up, after 6 years, I took my sabbatical. Then I joined IDRC of Canada, which is a funding agency. So I spent 10 years with IDRC as a senior program specialist working in Asia and Africa. Ideally, I was covering South Asia and Central Asia and the rest of Africa, where I was assigned and where we were funding climate change projects. And that's me.
Wow, that's a really compelling story. And I can relate, when I go to Kenya or in other African countries, and it's the same thing, are you coming back? Why are you doing this? And it just tugs at your heart. And the conflict that goes in our minds, we go through in our minds, trying to make a difference, but also an income, and sometimes it feels like they're two parallel roads, and somehow they don't seem to meet.
Yes.
Yeah, but I'm really inspired and jazzed that you made that commitment and that decision to go back to Kenya and make a difference in the work that you're doing. And so we'll talk a little bit about that work, where you now focus on climate and development, and then you also talk about sustainable energy and then green and circular economy. I mean, there's some terminologies here that I am not familiar with, and I know a few other people are not. And so I'm so glad we can have this chance to talk more about that. So to the lay person, why should we be concerned about climate? It just, in the past few years, it's suddenly become such a big deal, and it's has received its share amount of opposition. Why is climate so important?
Yeah, that's a very nice question. Of course, we keep getting this kind of questions when we talk to the old folk back home and wherever. Firstly, I would say that, if whenever I meet the lay people, one thing I tell them is that the changes we are witnessing, the weather patterns, the erratic rainfall, the drying rivers, these are things they can associate with. Shifting growing seasons, they are no longer seeing, those ants getting out of the ant holes, and some insects that fly during certain months are no longer flying during those months, and so on. So this is something that they easily relate with. And then the other thing is human activity. We try to tell them that it's human activity that is primarily causing this whole climate change problem. And then we try to explain to them how the burning of fossil fuels in the vehicles and in industry and so on is contributing to this. We don't have to go to the depths of who polluted more, when and how, but you just let them know that it's because of the burning of fossil fuels that is happening since pre-industrial times. And thirdly, you also tell them that things are going to get worse because what is already in the atmosphere is enough to cause significant calamity if nothing changes, if leaders are not going to take that step of changing things and so on. And they will end up with the whole range of impacts that have been put in the media, sea level rise, or shifting disease patterns. Like in Kenya here, we keep telling them malaria is no longer a preserve of Western Kenya. It's now shifting slowly, heading towards the Mount Kenya side because of the temperature change. And this is something that raises eyebrows, but that's the reality. Reduced water supplies, prices of commodities are going to shift because production is going down, yields are failing. We are having to import lots of food now. Maize we are importing from Tanzania, too much of it from Uganda. Some comes even as far as Mexico, and so on. So those are the kind of things that we tell them are going to happen. They've even witnessed other impacts like migration. People have left their homes literally to go to other places. We have these cases in northern Kenya, which we can talk about, and that has brought conflict. Even grazing of animals and so on, people have gone to graze in areas where they are not wanted, in foreign lands. Yeah. So they are thought to be intruders, and therefore it becomes a serious challenge. Then I'll tell them, they tell me now, what do we do? How can we adapt to this situation? So then we tell them what they can do in the long run. They don't have to keep planting maize every year in, year out, year in. It doesn't produce anything. They need to change, plant crops that are short cycled, like 2 to 3 months, and then you harvest. Things that are drought resistant, and also use the meteorological information, this just climate information, to plan their planting cycles. And then that way they will be able to adapt to the circumstances.
Wow, that's really interesting information. And we often don't think about, especially human activities. We'll defend ourselves and say, oh, there's so many other problems. When you think about fossil fuel and looking at all the impoverished communities and the limited access they have to, I would say, clean energy, if you will. But we'll talk more about that when we try and figure out some of the solutions to that. So you gave us a really good idea why we should be concerned about climate. So why have the changes in climate only recently become important? Because I know my grandmother and grandfather used to have those discussions, but why is it now an issue that we all want to bring to the forefront?
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. I think it's always been important, but only to certain circles where you and I belong. But for the rest of the common man, actually, they are hearing more of this now because of a number of reasons. One of them being that there isn't scientific findings from the international panel, science panel on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. It brought out these findings, which were released to the COP21. This was in 2015. That changes that we are witnessing are evidence that, climate change is unequivocal. There's no more doubt about it. Whoever is doubting is lost. And secondly, that the changes were happening faster than we first thought. The evidence we've always had all along pointed to the fact that, this thing will happen this way. The models were still conflicting each other and so on. And so nobody was really, so we were hanging in that uncertainty and hoping that things will be better. But that was now the real data and scientific evidence that things will actually happen much faster than we thought. And then developing countries, particularly those in Africa, are so vulnerable and are going to be hit the hardest, okay, despite the fact that they contributed the least. And therefore, there's need to take action. So this kind of debate jolted world leaders congregating in, around that COP21 in Paris to come up with this Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement is the first that brought all countries together, all countries of the world together to sign on one same thing, an agreement that does not say the rich must do this and the poor must do this. No. Everybody is going to do the same thing, bound by this so-called nationally determined contributions. Mm-hmm. And every country was given time. They sat down and they produced their first NDCs, which take 5 years, and then they're reviewed. So the first ones were reviewed last year, or rather in 2020. And so now we are on the second NDCs, which have been revised to make them more ambitious, at reducing those effects. So I think that's why it's been hyped so much at this particular point.
So when you say NDC, what does that mean?
Yeah, the nationally determined contributions. Mm-hmm. That is the commitment by a country on what they are able to do within their means, and also laying out what they would like to do, but they do not have the resources. So if anyone else want to help, this is the full list of what we can do if we have all the resources. And then that list is revised every 5 years. And it's made more ambitious. Like Kenya's first NDC aimed to reduce carbon emissions by 30%. But when they revised it, it went to 32%. So now we are looking at 32%.
So when you look at all those countries and the NDCs that they have committed, do you see similarities across countries? What are those main issues that countries want to focus on, especially carbon emission?
What I can say is I've not done that research myself, looking at all those NDCs to pull out that. But what I've read, analysis I've read from those who've done it, it all points to one, the fact that all those NDCs put together do not yield a significant enough commitment to take us to a safe place. They're still below I mean, we can only reduce by maybe 40-45% of what we need to reduce if we are to avoid the catastrophe. That is we are all aspiring at 2 degrees, but we are urged to do better and achieve 1.5 degrees centigrade. Okay, so those commitments put together cannot achieve that still. We are still in the 4.5% and so on. So countries need to do better than that.
Yeah. And I think it's a commitment of resources, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's like I said earlier, every country has put all that it says needs to be done for them to achieve the ambition, however low it is.
Yeah.
And on that list, like Kenya says, they can only fund 12% of those wish to do things, and they urge the rest of the world to put in any help from the richer countries and so on to meet the rest of the budget. Yeah.
Wow. And the work continues. So
I'm telling
you've led many projects focusing on climate change adaptation in semi-arid economies. So first of all, you talked to us about climate change. Now, you've done climate change adaptation. So that's something I would want you to describe to us what that looks like. And then you've done this in semi-arid economies. What are those economies, right? And what is the impact of climate change on those economies?
Okay. Yeah, as you rightly put it, climate change adaptation is a term commonly used. We know that whatever we do, even if we stopped running all vehicles today, as we did when COVID was at its peak, we will not achieve the kind of reduction expected. Okay.
Wow.
So, and like I said, with what is in the atmosphere already, the warming that is happening and is bound to happen will definitely condemn the rest of the underprivileged world to those harsh conditions. They will need to adapt, therefore. They will need to do things to keep surviving. So those things that you need to do to keep afloat is what I may want to loosely call adaptation. For example, I mentioned increasing the number of goats, maybe in the northern Kenya, as opposed to cattle, because cattle are not very resistant at higher temperatures. Temperatures above 31 degrees has been proven. More goats and sheep can survive there more than cattle. So that's one way of doing it. Number two, you can also get cattle that are very resistant in Uganda, like the Ankole cattle. If you can get those, I've not tried, but perhaps if you adopted some of those in Kenya, maybe through breeding and so on, our communities in Kenya could be able to move to such. Or introducing drought-resistant varieties like green grams, we call them dengu, or let me say groundnuts, so that train people to understand that you can actually stop experimenting with maize every year like our folks always do, because it's a staple food. Even when it's failing, they can see it like an onion thing, and they still want to insist on planting maize, when they can actually plant groundnuts or plant chickpeas or plant green grams and take that to the market, earn money, and then buy maize. Simple trick, but I mean, people believe they must see maize on their own farm, even when it is in an area where you are not supposed to be producing it. So that's one of the things we've seen. So the semi-arid economies I've worked in, and actually most of my work while I was at IDRC covered, I'm talking about a lot of the Eastern and Southern Africa. I'm talking about the Sahel of Africa, which covers, the entire east to west, and a significant part of Asia, which, I covered countries like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, all the way to Nepal, India. We had projects in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and so on. So the kind of, the kind of lessons that I could pull out quickly, is that climate change will have varying and negative impacts, but similarly present, or rather present a range of opportunities. It's not just doom. It is presenting certain opportunities. So this is what research actually pulled out. And we, for example, in Kenya, I'll give an example. We visited, there's a farmer called Dr. Kituyi. He's a retired vet who used to see animals which are dying. The people in northern Kenya wait until the animals are about to die, is when they're now trying to frantically look for market to sell them, because, people are sticking on their animals. They want to keep their animals and be known to be rich when they point at the animals, even when they're about to die. So he used to see that happening and thought this is a good business opportunity. So somebody brings very emaciated animals and sells for as low as 5,000, 8,000 Kenya shillings, which is about how much? $50? Yeah. So he buys those and then fattens them using his vet experience and training. So he makes the right food rations and puts in soybeans and all this maize and stuff like that. And then the cows are fed. And then within weeks, 6 weeks, a cow is 3 times its weight. They're heavy and they're ready to go to the market. And he sells the same at between 50 and 70,000 Kenya shillings.
Wow.
So that is like, is that 10 times or 100 times? 10 times.
Yeah, 10 times, yeah.
10 times the price, yeah. So, and that is an opportunity this guy got to do business. So it's an opportunity for some people who see the sense, and it's also a bad thing for others. Then another thing we learned was that droughts may get worse in some of the areas, while others will experience significant downpours. Heavy flooding is expected in many areas. Like in Kenya, we might just have, it doesn't mean that if the temperature increase will be so much that the whole of Kenya will be roasting. No, some areas will receive heavy rainfall. Some areas will, of course, have challenges getting the water. And so we expect to see increased cases of migration. And migration, we've already proven it, it's happening. And then, of course, there are opportunities also in wildlife conservancies. So people can actually, you can get a permit from Kenya Wildlife Service, and then you are allocated some animals, to keep on your conservancy, and that is happening. We already have people doing that in Laikipia, most of Laikipia County. That is happening. So those are some of the lessons we learned. There'll be challenges, but there'll also be opportunities. So it is upon one to discover where are the opportunities and then harness them, and also where are the challenges, and also see how best to adapt to the circumstances, because solutions are there, they've been tested. The challenge is how to scale them up.
Wow. Are there anything being done to help, especially with the farmers or the livestock holders? Because we know that cows are a representation of wealth. So some of those cultural dispositions. Do you think there's anything being done to help with that?
I think that is a challenge, particularly with the old guys. With the youth, we are beginning to see a difference. Even those in the north of the country, I mean, we are beginning to see a significant difference. A lot of them are adapting to some of the agricultural methods being introduced to them. Recently, there was a whole pullout in the local dailies showing how certain ladies who are university graduates who are just languishing at home decided to take on this farming thing. And so they worked with some NGOs there to set up some farms, and they're producing huge watermelons and onions and tomatoes and stuff like that. And at the same time, they're also having beehives being set up and so on. So there's that kind of thing. They're beginning to take on the bull by the horns in their own localities, as opposed to coming to the cities to look for white collar jobs. Yeah.
That's a great initiative, because that kind of migration, urban, rural, has not really served the urban cities much, and has taken away from the rural areas too. Yeah. So I'm glad to see such kinds of inventions with these folks.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a paper that you looked at, or you focused on, that examined the uptake and use of climate information services to enhance agriculture. We were just talking about farming and food production among smallholder farmers in Eastern and Southern Africa region. So tell us more about that project and what you gleaned from that.
Yeah, actually, one thing we learned is that meteorological data that previously was never really disseminated well to the farmers, other than on national radio station, when they say it will rain here and there, just mentioning names of districts, instead of narrowing down to the location where the farmers are best, just because the technology those days was not that specific. But right now, things have improved and it's narrowing. You can now do at a much smaller precision, or rather, a small area can be targeted, like a kilometer by a kilometer, they can now be able to give you that information. We even have apps that have been developed, which farmers are now using on their phones to be able to get that degree of detail of met information to inform their planning and activities for the farm for the next seasons. So we actually learned that, and we had various experiences here in Kenya, where we had even the Kenya Met Department joining in and working with traditional forecasters. Those African forecasters, they use insects and birds and all manner of things to tell. And their predictions actually come to 80 to 90% correct, as opposed to what the Met Department is giving. So they call them rainmakers. So those guys have been well known for that. And so that is one thing we learned. It's important for farmers to use climate information that is credible, that is sourced from the Met Department, to plan for their local activities. And that is something that those who are using it more or less get it right. I mean, they get 90% and above of what they plant and so on. If the prediction is that don't plant anything, then don't. Or plant something else that can withstand that condition. And they'll be able to tell you, this season, don't plant maize, don't plant beans, don't plant that, but you can do sorghum and pigeon peas, that kind of thing. And then maybe next year, same season, same time, now you can do maize because the prediction will be favorable. So people who've done that have really benefited. So that if maize passes, good. If not, they'll plant something that they will take to the market and get the money, then buy maize from someone else who produced it easily. Then the other thing we learned from that study is that building capacity of the farmers is key, and particularly the women, because the women have always been left behind when it comes to people going to attend the baraza to be given a bottle of soda to take after the meeting and so on. So they keep the women away. The women keep on the farm with the kids. The wazes, the old men are the ones who go to the meetings. So we came up with this finding that, if you trained women, you get much, much more returns, because that knowledge, the probability of it being implemented on the farm is much higher, because they are the ones who till the land mainly. Then the other one is, of course, getting and this is actually a government thing, making sure that the advisories, the climate advisories, reach the farmers on time and translated in the language that they understand best, and also telling them what else they can do other than just farm stuff. They can be told maybe there'll be a flood in this area, so schools in this area will be closed. All kids in school A can go to school B for a week or so and then come back, that kind of thing, so that it becomes a broad advisory, but coming from the Met department. So that and a vast of other enabling environment kind of elements came out. And I would encourage people to read that paper more.
Awesome. And I'm just wondering, you talked about the traditional meteorological people who are there. Were they involved at all? Like, did you want them to also participate in that? Because, the communities believe them, right?
Oh, yes. Actually, it was part of the design of the project. It was funded by IDRC, jointly with DFID at that time. Now it is FCDO, the government of the United Kingdom. Because we said we can only win this war by involving these guys, because in that area, or let me say in those areas down in the villages, people really trust in these rainmakers, and they go to them for advice on when to plant and when the rain is coming and so on. So we said, why not then involve these guys? We do a joint study. We be humble enough to accept what they bring as their forecasts, and we document it in modern ways, and then give these guys a chance to fly in an aircraft and see the clouds, because they believe their gods are in these clouds, okay? And then just show them that there's actually no one up there. It's just clouds, okay? So, we actually budgeted for air tickets. We flew about four of those men. They are leaders. They are lead meteorologists, and so they flew from Kisumu to Nairobi to attend a workshop where we were launching this project, and then they were flown back. So during the flight, of course, they were marveling at everything. Everything is first time for them, and they are wondering. And so they were being shown the clouds, just this white stuff you can't see nothing through. And so it took that to make them open up their shrines. So we have shrines in it's a place after Maseno in Kenya, if you know it. The shrines are somewhere there. It's like a small forest where no woman steps, only men are allowed. And not just any common men. I mean, they have to be this age of men and so on. And so all that was demystified by this project after doing all those flights. And so then the experiments were done, because they used to go in there and blow into some pot, and then they see the suds coming out of the soapy water, because some leaves have that soapy effect. And so when they see the bubbles blowing, the physicists on our team are seeing atmospheric pressure balances and so on. So they can even measure the size of those suds. They're able to explain it from physics. Then we had botanists on board who were able to explain things from their botanical way. We had meteorologists. We had anthropologists. There was a whole team of people studying all manner of things. And we all came to a conclusion that the science behind what they were doing is well known. I mean, it can be explained. It's just that no one has published it. And so somebody needs to purposely go and, study that, and they'll be able to prove them using some laws of physics and so on. So it was quite amazing. Wow. And our minister, Judy Wahungu, at that time was the first woman to step there, escorted by, of course, project funders and so on, who had turned up for that meeting. Yeah.
That's incredible. Yes, I think it's awesome when we include these individuals who are well respected in the communities, and I'm glad your project undertook that process. So very quickly, what is that now relationship between climate and development, now that we've seen how it can impact and the challenges that people are experiencing from a developmental perspective, and why is this important?
Yeah, I think the relationship is quite clear. You see, change in climate is impacting on so many things. Look at all parameters that define development. All efforts to eradicate poverty and disease and so on. If you look at all those factors, you find that each of them is being hit by climate change. Look at, for example, the shifting disease patterns because of climate. Look at, just the warming, how it's affecting food production because of drying up soils, because of evaporation loss. Virtually all these sectors are affected. If agriculture is affected, you know what happens. Food won't get on the market. Everybody will be starving there and so on. People will be so sick in hospitals, doctors cannot get there, etc., etc. So there is that interconnectedness. But at the same time, development is also contributing to climate change, as we all know. I mean, it's all this industrialization and our comfort driving around and so on that is causing climate to change. So there is that chicken and egg situation that we tend to see here. And I mean, it's with that knowledge, I mean, I think we have enough guidance so far from what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has found and what is coming out of all these negotiations that happen every year. There's always disagreement on this and that, but the broad message is that climate is changing and people need to do something, to either adapt or to cut emissions or, to do whatever else. Like now we are talking about switching to electric vehicles. Maybe you guys in the States are already having those. Some of us here, we've not seen one. But I want to believe that very soon that will be the order of the day here. Yeah.
Awesome. So we're going to shift focus a little bit and now look at sustainable energy. And this is a term that is quite popular. And I want us to learn more about it. It's sustainable energy is very important in growing economies, especially in our resource-limited countries. What do we need to know about sustainable energy? Are there different types of sustainable energy?
Thank you. Energy is said to be sustainable if it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs, just from the sustainable development definition. I mean, it applies to the energy here. So what is this that we need to do to be able to consume available sources of energy in ways that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will still have some left for them to spend, and also leave some for their own great-grandchildren. So that is really what the simple definition would be. And of course, most definitions of sustainable energy include consideration of environmental aspects, such as greenhouse gas emissions, and social and economic aspects, such as energy poverty, So those are the kind of things we tend to bring in. So you talk of a benefit you're going to get out of it, but also talk about the the other elements of, particularly on the social and economic side of things. And sustainable energy can be defined as a form of energy also that can be utilized again and again and again without putting a source of that energy in danger of getting depleted, expired, or vanished, because some energy sources are being said to be, on their way out. Look at governments like the Kingdom of, the Emirates. Mm-hmm. They saw this long time ago in Dubai, and they decided to invest in alternative, economic things. And now Dubai is a tourist heaven. They're taking everyone on earth there. So their biggest income earner is tourism, and it's hoped that will continue. Somebody keeps telling them in 12 years' time their oil will be wiped out. So that's why they focused more on, let's keep building and encouraging tourists to come into our country. Mm-hmm. And types of sustainable energy, of course, include geothermal energy. Like, as you know, here in Kenya, we have a good amount of our electricity coming from geothermal, wind power, solar power, hydropower, and bioenergy. All those are examples of energy that is sustainable. Yeah.
Wow. So we know that there's sustainable energy, but then there's also renewable energy. What is different about those two?
Yeah. So renewable energy is, like from the sun, like solar energy, like wind energy, this, it is, you cannot deplete it. It's this endless, and it's not polluting, it's not having any other impacts on man that is, created by its use. So that is renewable energy. So, and sustainable energy, there are some definitions, some writers have said even fossil fuel is sustainable in some places because they have a lot of it, and they believe it is, even if 100,000 generations come, they will never deplete it. So some of them say that is also sustainable. But from the development side, we try to say energy that is can be used and reused without damage to the environment, without any impact on the environment. So if you can achieve that with any other fuel in the course of use, probably you may want to call it also sustainable. But as you know, it's we've tried to restrict, for the sake of sustainable development, we try to restrict it to what is, for example, being offered by renewable energies. Yeah. So
we now have, again, resource limited countries that are considered growing economies. So how is this sustainable energy being realized in this growing economy?
I think one of I can give a number of them. One is that policy is key. Without government leadership in a lot of these countries, you cannot achieve much. So policy change, recognizing the need to aggressively move and domesticate a lot of these renewable and sustainable energies would be, it would be difficult. So that is one. Number two is planning. Planning really matters, and planning is essential to be able to promote regional energy integration, because you can imagine, like now, Ethiopia is going to be the leader in the region, producing significant amounts of energy when their big dam is, commissioned. It will be more than they need. So Kenya is likely to be positioning itself to tap into that when that need comes up. And not only Kenya, even other countries in the surroundings, Sudan and so on. So they should be able to tap into that. So there is need for planning that recognizes the need to share with others. when we have this political integration happening. Then thirdly, markets also matter. The market mechanisms need to be developed to present the world's poor with cleaner, better energy options, because most of the time we tend to leave behind the poor when we are discussing energy solutions, energy options, or scaling up and so on. We sit in those offices and plan how things are going to move, and we ignore where the real mwananchi, the common man is. Then also the other thing is finance. Finance has always been a big problem when it comes to scaling up technology in general, but particularly energy technologies. So there's need to break free from its conservative strategy of funding traditional energy projects. Governments tend to fund just electricity. As grid, we are going to extend the grid from point A to point B, covering all those towns, but they leave the real user down there, who could have benefited significantly from maybe a mini grid that uses a few solar cells somewhere and serves the small community. So people keep on suffering here, hoping that one day the grid will pass by, when actually their needs could have been met by a simple solar panel that can be able to connect 5-6 homes, and you achieve the same goal. So it's those kind of things. And the government can afford to sort those small things, as opposed to waiting for the big monies that they will need to bring the grid, to pass by. So those are some of the things. And then, of course, our mindsets need to change. We need to view energy systems from a bottom up and also from top down, which is the same thing I've been saying. Governments at the top hardly listen to or hardly involve the bottom when it comes to making some of these critical decisions. So they sit and believe that what government will prescribe is the best, but they forget input like what I've just told you. If 1 or 2 villages come up with the idea of having a mini grid, can the government give them money through constituency development fund or from whatever? But politicians will just come and pump into them that power is going to come. Just vote me in and the grid will pass here, And when the money comes, they eat it wherever, and then they say, oh, your project will come during another term, So it's those kind of things. Then cooperation, of course, is key, even among the private sector and government in scaling up some of these things. Because government sector, if given the right operating environment, they're able to finance some of these things, which the government has failed to do. But the government tends to stifle entry by the private sector into a lot of these spaces. And so they lose out on that opportunity. And finally, of course, politics matters very much, particularly here in Africa, in our countries, including Kenya here, where when one innovative person brings a good idea, like the mini grids, he'll be fought very hard by an area politician who is in parliament, who feels this guy is trying to impress these guys, therefore investing in future votes to remove the other guy. So it's a very tricky thing. A lot of projects have failed to go through because of political interference like that. So there's need to, right from the planning stage, for one to find how best to massage all the parties, to realize that there's nothing politics here. This is just development coming in to help the people. Yeah.
And so to finish up and to, be able to look at this from sort of an overarching perspective, we've seen climate and its impact on development and vice versa, the importance of sustainable energy in growing economies. But now there's the green and circular economy, right? How do all this interrelate? And what is that green and circular economy, and why do we need to know more about that?
Thank you very much, Caroline. The concept of the green economy, came up because of the name green, which has always been used in different circles to mean environmentally sober or environmentally conscious, if I may use that term. And so when we talk about an economy, we are talking about a big thing. I mean, bigger than yourself, maybe a country. Yeah. So if a country where goods are being produced and sold, and there's a lot of economic activity happening, when it is green, it is said to be all this production is happening with minimum environmental risk and also ecological soundness. We also consider it to be socially upright. It's upholding proper labor rights, human rights conditions. People are working in very clean environments, and nobody's being undermined. I mean, nobody's rights are being stumbled on, even as as they produce those goods. And at the same time, also the producers of these goods are assumed to be working towards their profits, but also making sure that they're being governed in ways that are proper. Obeying the laws. There's no corruption and all these kind of things that come in. So a green economy to me is that kind of an economy. And but circular economy came in much later, particularly by the resource efficiency considerations, whereby instead of overusing stuff, or instead of throwing out stuff that has been used, if it is something that can be reused, if it is something that can be collected, cleaned, and reused, or perhaps recycled, then why not recycle it? So we have opportunities for business in some of those situations, whereby someone else can come and collect on your behalf, then go and clean that and maybe sell it to somebody else who will use that for something else. Some people cut some things and make them into flower pot, or something, instead of just throwing that away. But there are others which can be melted and blown out into something else, like in the case of glass or in the case of plastics and so on. And those have been able to provide opportunities for some small and medium scale enterprises that have come up and are creating jobs for others. So a circular economy is that kind of economy, whereby you can reuse stuff or recycle and be able to live in a proper environment. So it just depends on what kind of systems and regulations, policies exist in that economy that may require that to happen. Because like here in Africa, I've not seen countries where we have a lot of discipline, unless there is, the carrot and stick is really working to ensure that the circular economy functions. You can put containers there, clearly labeled, put this here, put bio-waste here, put bottles here, put tins here, but no one looks at that. I mean, they just dump anything anywhere, even just down there on the grass next to those containers. So we need to educate people of the importance of circularity. We need to educate the masses on why they need to be responsible and what kind of opportunities are available in the course of doing that. There could be jobs being thrown down the drain.
Yes. And it's interesting you talk about how sometimes it's difficult to change people's habits, and we know behavior is never static, but people do tend to hang on to what they're used to doing all the time. And I remember there's a time in Kenya when there were consequences for throwing trash on the road and cigarette butts, and people followed that.
Yeah.
So probably, and now we don't even use plastic, right? There are consequences for that. So I think it's possible to teach people that sort of circular.
In theory. We have plastics all over. I mean.
Right. So I think the idea of recycling is something that we need to continuously inject in the community, if you will, and sensitize them to that. It's going to take time before people, adapt to that. But like you said, if there's an attached benefit, like, oh, this will create jobs, we need people to come and collect this trash. We need people to come and help recycle this plastics and things of that nature. Probably that would help change the some of these behaviors and make people more conscious about what the green economy, if you will, or the circular economy, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining me today. And, there might be people who would be interested in getting in touch with you. Do you have an email address that they would be able to contact you on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm happy to take this conversation further. I mean, if there's anyone interested, and I think you can share my email. Feel free to share my phone contacts and my email too. Yeah.
Oh, great. But while we are here and as they are listening to you, do you want to say your email address? Maybe shout it out.
Yeah. It's evans.kituyi@gmail.com.
Okay, so evans.kituyi@gmail.com.
Exactly.
Yes, there's still so much that we didn't even cover, but there's a lot that we'll come back for part 2 and follow up on any questions that come up and any other information that we were not able to cover today. But I'd thank you for taking the time to speak to me, and also to say that we hope that soon we'll be able to really undertake this circular economies and the green economy and renewable energy, and be conscious about the impact of climate change on development, especially in the continent and in other resource-limited regions.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thanks for hosting me.
Yes.
Look forward to talking again.
Thank you. And to everyone else, thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to having you on another episode of Public Health Music.